We are live, chaps. Thank you so much for all making an appearance for this little war council. I say that in the nicest, most light-hearted way that we could. But we all chat via WhatsApp together, and we stay in contact and talk about ideas and things. And we just thought we'd have a very short video, just because obviously the world's just taken a turn for the worst. The MAGA movement has been turned on its head. Did Trump break promises that he'd made? Well, we'll certainly talk about that. Tulsi, everyone loves Tulsi. How can you not love Tulsi? What's happening there? I did speak to Danny, Colonel Davis, yesterday morning. I said, "What's going on with Tulsi?" And he just said, in our community, it's just not good, which totally makes sense as well. But just before we kick off, Ian and Steve, do you want to just give a little rundown of what you've been up to this weekend?
Yeah,
if you did something really boring, lie.
I've been up to Latvia for a family wedding, but it's a quick turnaround because before that I was in Budapest for this global dialogue organised by the Hungarian Institute of International Affairs. Peter Szijjártó, the Foreign Secretary, gave a keynote address. Liz Truss even turned up. John Mearsheimer. It's a really mixed cast, but it's a really fascinating discussions, talking about how Hungary is kind of really shifting its position away from Europe towards being much more multi-vector in the multipolar world. So that was incredibly fascinating to be there.
Very sensible, I would suggest.
Indeed,
with all the madness that's going on.
Yeah,
very sensible. Indeed. And Steve?
Yeah, no, I had I was at a conference during the week. Yeah, I was at Global Offshore Wind, but then
that's enough about that.
Yeah, it's enough of that. But I actually then finished off with dinner last night with Danny Davis, which was really good fun. And we spent a lot of time talking about Tulsi Gabbard. We talked about air defense and stuff like that. But what of course we didn't talk about was the possibility, or we did talk a little bit about the possibility that Iran might attack Qatar and other places. Then I had a really good conversation with my brother only this afternoon. He's a ex-DA defense attaché in Qatar. He's an Arabic speaker, and we had a really good conversation about what might or might not happen. So Al-Udeid was one of the targets he said was most likely. And then suddenly, as we were talking, the information came through on Qatar. So we live in interesting times. In a way, the Tulsi story has sort of gone a little bit quiet compared to the recent attack.
Yeah, I mean it's utter madness. I mean, I live in this utopian world where people are always trying to be altruistic and do good things. Obviously, that doesn't exist. Yeah. But I did think to myself that before Trump kicks this off, if he's going to kick it off, which I did believe he would, I hoped he wouldn't, but he obviously did. I personally thought if Tulsi had followed him up to the nth degree. And obviously, if he kicks off and does done what he'd done, she could then resign, and then she could run on a presidential ticket with Tucker Carlson, who is incredibly popular, whether you like him or dislike him. He's really popular in the MAGA movement, if that makes sense. And they would be standing on the ticket that Trump made: no more wars, no more foreign interventions, and try and focus on domestic issues about improving things for everyday Americans. But obviously that dream just disappeared.
There is a point there about the MAGA movement being very personalized to Trump, and how it's actually much bigger than him, because it talks to, or seems to talk to, the concerns of ordinary Rust Belt, blue collar American workers, the same people that sort of Tucker Carlson talks to, and so on. So that's an interesting dynamic for me in terms of actually how MAGA is morphing into not just being about Trump, and of course in Trump world everything seems to be about Trump.
Of course,
but I mean those fractures are going to be interesting to watch over the coming months.
And what do you both? Sorry, Steve.
No, I saw, just to follow on from what Ian said, I saw a poll, which I think it might have been Tucker Carlson had taken, actually, talking about the overwhelming of 350,000 people of his very, very many followers, and the overwhelming number were against any war in Iran.
Yeah, of course.
So yeah.
But if you look at the numbers, if you look at the numbers, I mean, a conventional war wouldn't make sense for the US anyway. I mean, Iranian spending on sort of conventional military power is tiny in comparison to what the Americans spend. I mean, this talks to the point that Trump doesn't obviously seem to have any clear plan or strategy. He's just been tempted into this by Netanyahu. I wonder whether there's something about the kind of personality cult of Trump, that if somebody comes along and gives him lots of flattery, then he's more susceptible to their to their advances, and his inherent kind of pro-Israel stance anyway has just kind of led him to be dragged slowly into this incrementally without any clear plan in mind.
Yeah,
but the without going into a total cesspit of conspiracy, you mentioned the flattery, the adulance, the deference that Netanyahu places on Trump, which obviously he loves. In the world of conspiracy, and I'm just surmising here, could there be more sinister things? I mean, is that possible? Do you believe? We talk about Russians and compromat and things like that. Do you think there could be anything potentially sinister? Is that possible? That's what I wanted to put out there.
God, that's good. 64,000.
No pressure, chaps.
No, it's a good 64,000.
I'm glad I'm asking the questions and not answering them.
When there's a choice between conspiracy and cock-up, I generally trend towards cock-up from experience. That's usually what it is. So I think this is largely cock-up. I mean, I might be wrong, but I don't know what Ian Proud thinks. But I was looking, I thought, what are they going to do? What's Trump going to do? Because after we've had the first attack, which I wasn't entirely surprised, but I wasn't entirely sure of it either. I was beginning to think, is this choreographed with the Iranians? So that it's just Vance actually said that we're not attacking the Iranian people, we're attacking the Iranian nuclear facilities. And I thought that was a very measured thing. But the problem is that Vance doesn't have control over Trump and what he's going to say next. No. And then suddenly he's actually starting to talk about doubling down, and he's starting to talk about obliterating the nuclear facility. So I think he may have started that way, but the problem is once you get going like this, then who knows what's going to happen next. I thought that the Iranians might actually be very canny, and they might say, okay, we are going to keep putting pressure on the Israelis, but not attack the Americans, because actually that will put the Americans in a difficult situation. But I was wrong.
Yeah, well, I agree with you 100%. I genuinely did not believe for a moment that the Iranians would attack the Americans, because it would just open a whole can of worms. There is the counter argument to that. If you stand up and be placid and do little or nothing, you're seen as weak. I understand that. I don't believe that they're weak and stupid at all. But I didn't think just opening up a whole can of worms that they could potentially avoid, I thought they would do. But
I think it's an easy score. I think it's an easy score for the Iranians, though, to fire at some big military base in the middle of a desert, nowhere near civilian areas. It can be caught by kind of collapse and that sort of thing, that the Americans have had time to evacuate beforehand, because clearly they'd been briefed on it. I mean, they were telling the BBC before the rockets were in the air. So, doing that, having some, as Steve says, kind of choreographed thing where the Iranians fire back and their missiles get taken out by air defenses. The big challenge for me here is actually what this means for, Qatar, because this will be, despite the kind of, the showy kind of nature of this kind of tit for tat. There's a question about what happens next in terms of the US response, of course. But I mean, for Qatar, it's massively disruptive to them economically. I mean, they're really dependent on tourism and as a really kind of significant global aviation hub. They can't afford to really have their airspace shut down for hours at a time, because the Iranians are lobbing missiles at an American base in the desert. So, I mean, that's going to put pressure on the Qataris to actually put pressure on the sort of, the Americans to, perhaps take a more moderate line.
I think the question is this, what are the Iranians doing? And is this choreographed with the Americans? Because if it's choreographed with the Americans, then I'd just relax a tiny bit. But if it's not, and actually this is the Iranians going all in, then, when the next thing is we'd expect to see the Americans going all in, then who knows where the escalation could lead. So, a $64,000 question, which of those two it might be. But I have the feeling that it might be the Iranians going all in. I hope not. That's the feeling I have.
Well, Hegseth and Rubio both made it abundantly clear. They're emphatic, saying that, you know, this is not about regime change. And then Trump just messaged and said, this is about regime change. It's funny because it's so ridiculous. It's not funny because it's funny. It's just they just can't get their act. The fact that they can't communicate internally and get their act together just says everything about the administration. I would suggest, and how ad hoc it is.
And of course, what we know, isn't it? What we know is that we talk about regime change, but actually, what they really mean is government change. So, of course, it's a regime when we want to change the government, and it's a government when where actually we quite like them. So, we're not talking about regime change in Saudi Arabia or regime change in China. We're actually, you know, so. But I think, as we know, we've done fantastically well in regime change over the last 25 years. I mean, it worked brilliantly well in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, and Ukraine. I mean, it's worked brilliantly, of course. So, of course, it'll work again brilliantly.
Yeah, Trump's magic wand. But you can't, I mean, all the military experts say you cannot facilitate a regime change just by bombing. You need boots on the ground. No, I mean, and even with boots on the ground doesn't necessarily work as well, as we know in Iraq and Afghanistan. I mean, we were in Afghanistan, I was there for 20 years. And what we're trying to do is change their culture. You know, it's just not going to happen. So I just don't quite see where this lies. What I don't understand is whether there really is air supremacy, and that the bombs were, or whether it's done more distantly, as Alistair Crook's suggesting. And my brother, who's an expert there, thinks there is air supremacy. Alistair Crook is saying the opposite. And I suspect, though, that the Americans have been quite cautious about going in over Iraq, and that I suspect that actually it will be more. It felt that first attack felt a bit choreographed to me. I don't know, but we'll see. Yeah, I mean, with the greatest respect to your brother, you know, I speak to some, I'll tell you off camera who, but some fairly senior people, and they say stuff that, and I've said in previous conversations, I don't think for one moment they are lying or deliberately deceiving me or trying to misinform me, not because I'm a nobody to them when we have these conversations. But, you know, Russia's on its knees. Russia's economy is about to implode. You know, and they believe it. They really believe that. So it begs the question: where does the propaganda come from? And it comes down from above, obviously. And you know, I guess culturally, when you're in senior military positions, you don't question the chain of command, because if everybody did that, it would fall apart. You know, you work in a culture where you're asked.
This goes back to the question I raised at the start about, is there any real strategy or plan? Because if Iran had a nuclear weapon, then, you know, the US wouldn't be bombing them. By all accounts, they may have moved their centrifuges and so on before the, you know, attacks on Fordo, you know, took place. It spends a tiny amount compared to the US on conventional military means. There'd be no obvious strategic benefit for the US in having a conventional. What is the point of this? It goes back to the conspiracy versus Cockup. I'm with Steve very much on the kind of Cockup line of this. But I mean, the interesting thing for me is that nobody's talking about Gaza now, are they? Because what Israelis
or Ukraine,
or Ukraine, well, indeed, or Ukraine. That may actually be a good thing, in my personal opinion. But I mean, nobody's really talking about Gaza, and the Israelis have successfully kind of dragged attention away from that by sort of focusing on Iran. I think that's a wider grand strategy game happening here.
Yeah, I mean, the propaganda in the... Sorry, Steve.
The really interesting thing is actually what really is going on in Israel. I read a really interesting German analysis about the Israeli economy, that they're now spending nearly 9% of their GDP is going on arms and the war. You know, sort of treble or quadruple of what we're doing. And actually, of course, they've got a lot of reservists who are actually out there who can't be working, so that their economy is in serious trouble. And if they really are being attacked in the way that we hear, and a lot of Israelis who were expecting the Iron Dome, etc., to be successful, it isn't successful, then how long is it? You know, how long is it before Netanyahu is the regime that's changed as opposed to Khomeini? Open question.
Yeah, I mean, wars are won by economies, not armies, right? You know, that's what they say. And Israel just doesn't have the density in terms of its size, population size.
No,
and
it's
so
tiny.
on. I mean, it's a powerful economy for an economy of 8 million sort of people, but it's still an economy of 8 million people. So, I mean, it's ultimately it doesn't have that kind of real strategic depth, you know, to mount a kind of long war, which may be why they've been trying to go for a quick decapitation of the regime, because they realise that they can't actually sustain anything for longer than 6 months to a year.
All the military talking heads that I speak to say Iran is no pushover. In any shape, it's no Iraq. It's just no Iraq. Which begs the question, as Ian rightly said, is, you know, where's the plan? Where's the strategy? But I believe it's sort of axiomatic in a way that there is definitely a bigger agenda here, and I'll state what that is. General Wesley Clark, the very, very famous video from 2001, where, you know, he visited the Pentagon. You know, he'd retired and he popped in to see some of the old staff and some of the people that work for him. And he gets called into a room and says, hey, General, sir, we're going to go to war with 7 countries in 5 years. That was the original plan. And every single one of those has come to pass. And the only one that hasn't been bonged to kingdom come is Iran. So there is absolutely an agenda here driven by, well, we don't know, but we can guess and we can surmise, and who stands to benefit from all of these countries failing. You know,
as I keep saying, the RTX share price has doubled since the start of the Ukraine war, formerly defense contractor formerly called Raytheon.
Yeah, it's good.
It's
good for them.
There must come a stage, though, where people are starting to look at all the Western kit and saying, just a second, this hasn't been battle tested. It's really expensive. You know, we're already running out of all the Ukrainians have just about run out of most stuff. That's not true, but you know what I mean. They've run out of a lot of critical stuff. The Israelis are reportedly really worried about running out of air defense stuff. And furthermore, the air defense stuff doesn't work well. So, you know, you can, it'll work against cruise missiles and it will work against drones. But what it won't do, it won't work against ballistic missiles, or if it does, it's with a very low probability of kill. And there's no chance whatsoever with hypersonics. I hear that as well, the foreign minister of Iran is actually with the Russians at the moment. So you wonder what's going on there, because if the Russians were to pass to the Ukrainians hypersonic missiles, or they're to use their own, there's no chance that anybody can defend against those. I doubt even the Russians could defend against them, but it doesn't matter so much because they've got them and we haven't.
Yeah.
So the chances are that if those were used against Israel, I mean, I could see the end of Israel actually, or certainly the collapse of Israel if its economy is attacked in the way it is. Because again, I hear that they're attacking infrastructure, they're attacking energy. You know, it's all of those sort of things which a small country will be desperately difficult. They're attacking ports, so we'll see. But I mean, are the Iranians about to run out of their own weapon stocks? Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, I think Putin would be quite cautious in handing over some of their hypersonic capabilities. He's also still keen on some kind of bigger reset with the Americans. At the same time, now clearly they've been speaking out against the Israeli position, being a bit more nuanced about the kind of American position on this. I think they'd be very, very cautious about sort of going all in militarily to provide material. But I mean, he'll need to do something, because obviously he's been getting lots of drones and so on from the Iranians since the start of the war in Ukraine. So it's a careful choreography for him going on there. But I don't see a big kind of muscle move in terms of hypersonic capabilities that could, you know, massively change the calculus.
Yeah.
I hate myself for what I'm about to say, and I pray that I'm absolutely wrong with what I'm about to say. But I do believe, and I hope I'm wrong. I do believe that, you know, this is sort of clickbait to push Iran into a position where they lash out, as you said earlier on. You know, I personally didn't think they would. I thought they would hit Israel, they would hit the Straits of Hormuz, cause loads of chaos, but I didn't think that they would. Kick the Americans, because the kick that's coming back is far harder. Well, they have now, and I just wondered if this is a ploy for America to use tactical nukes against them, to say that we had to defend our greatest ally. We know what's happened to the Jews in the past with the Holocaust. We have to defend them against this evil empire that's all out about destroying them. And obviously they'll show 100 videos of Iranians going death to America and all that kind of stuff as an excuse. Obviously I pray that I'm wrong. I pray that I'm absolutely wrong, but I can see that. I can see that.
I can't, if I'm being completely honest.
Good.
Good. I think it would open up the schisms in MAGA even more than they are opening up right now. That's just kind of that would really be a kind of Yahoo move from Trump to do that. I can't see that he's going to do that. I think he's governed by very tactical, very immediate kind of thinking and personal vanity. I don't think that extends to him sort of pressing the nuclear button, at least not yet. We're not yet back in 1980 splitting image territory, but who knows? Who knows? Ian? We could be. We need a Trump splitting image puppet.
Yeah, I think I think that the interesting nuclear question is not whether the Americans would use tactical nuclear weapons, but whether the Israelis would. Because at the moment we're in a rather interesting situation where we've got two countries who believe that they're having existential issues now, thanks to the way in which the Trump administration, Netanyahu administration, have actually put pressure on Iran. We've got an existential fight between two people who both believe their existences are at stake. So, is it possible that the Israelis would use tactical nuclear weapons? I don't think it's impossible, but it wouldn't completely surprise me. It would be a horrible thing. They would lose what last bits and pieces of any reputation that they've got in the rest of the world if they do.
I don't think they care, to be honest with you. They're committing a genocide, and it's live streamed 24/7, and they just say it's a lie. I believe it's a crime to lie to Congress. And Netanyahu stood up and said, "We give every single Palestinian 3,500 calories a day, every single one." Do you know who steals it? Hamas. And I think he got 52 or 54 standing ovations. They're untouchable, these people, absolutely untouchable. So to take out probably their greatest threat on bogus terms, I just don't think they'd bat an eyelid, to be honest with you. As I said, I pray I'm wrong. I'd be delighted for it just to be me insanely wrong. I really would. And I hope Ian was right.
Where do you think diplomatically whether the Americans would do they have any control over the Israelis' use of their nuclear weapons? I don't know whether they do or not.
Well, they stole it from the Americans.
It's been a sovereign capability since the 70s, 80s. It's been. They got it from the Americans, of course. Whether the Americans have some sort of veto over its use, who knows? Of course, as you know, the US, as the UK kind of standing nuclear sort of capability, uses American systems. I
have honestly no idea where the degree of, if I did, I wouldn't be able to say, but I honestly have no idea whether the Americans have control over British nuclear weapons. We know they don't have control of the French, because the French are actually they're domestically made nuclear weapons, and so that's completely independent. But I have no idea whether I suppose the question is not whether the Americans have control over it, but whether the Israelis would actually want American sanction before using those weapons. And let's hope that they would. But again, I wouldn't put anything past Netanyahu if they feel that the existence of Israel is on the line. It'd be a really weird deterrence, because of course you've got the situation where the Israelis kick off the war by pretending that Iran is producing nuclear weapons, find out that they can't actually do anything. The Americans then come in behind them, and suddenly, because their existence is at risk, because they're being strategically bombarded to destruction by the Iranians, they decide to deter at it's almost like a negative deterrent somehow. Can't even think about it, what it might think like theoretically.
No.
Can I offer a slight segue into a related, slightly separate topic, the fact that the UK is yet again flat-footed on Israel kind of policy. Lamy has come out with this kind of half-hearted statement talking about Iran to take the off-ramp, whatever the off-ramp is. I'm not sure he knows, himself. But I mean, the UK has very obviously, the government has been unwilling to align itself completely with what the Americans are doing, because I think they're facing some internal resistance within the Labour Party about the uncomfortable choice that requires at the time that, we got Trump, who everybody, dislikes across the kind of Labour mainstream, and the Tories trying to position themselves as the ones who are very much in favour of supporting, aligning with what the Israelis are trying to do. It's some interesting domestic political choreography going on in the UK right now.
I saw that Reform actually said that we should be congratulating, congratulating Netanyahu, or it might be congratulating Trump, I can't remember. But I sort of think about it I think it's about time that the US alliance, whatever, it's an open question about whether that makes sense as a policy. And I've often thought that it doesn't. And I think actually a really good friend is one who is a critical friend at times. I mean, we didn't go with, I think it was Macmillan and Harold Wilson who didn't go into Vietnam. And good decision. It was Tony Blair who did go into Iraq. Bad decision. It was David Cameron who did go into Libya. Bad decision. So I think from time to time, having a critical friend who can say, yeah, okay, well, look, we just don't agree with this. I think rather than just being servile and doing whatever the Americans say, I think it's about time for us to start to think for ourselves a bit.
Well, JD Vance actually cautioned the Europeans, didn't he, including us, that he said, we want our friends in Europe to be partners, not vassals, not just do whatever we say. Unquestionably, we want people to challenge us and say that we're with you in principle, but we want to look at A, B, C, and D. Can we talk about it? Can we advance different ideas? And there just doesn't seem to be any of that.
No, I don't disagree with that. It's just that the Labour Party haven't actually obviously set out any ideas. They're just trying to kind of finesse their position, which doesn't appear to be very clear right now. They don't want to completely align with the Americans, but they're not really sure what to do. So as a result, Lamy is kind of waffling in his press statements, and actually Reform and the Conservative Party are occupying that which I think personally is untenable ground of saying, well, let's support the Americans anyway. So as on so many kind of Labour kind of foreign policy remits, we know that Starmer's not that interested in foreign policy. When he came in as Prime Minister, it took him 6 months to even sort of really get into what's happening in Ukraine, having essentially adopted a more hawkish version of what the Tories are doing in the absence of any ideas of his own. I think they're weak on foreign policy, the Labour Party, and it's being exposed now by what's happening here. I say this as a political independent. I don't support either party, mainstream party in the UK, but I think it's really exposing their weakness, and they're looking increasingly directionless, I think.
I support, just throwing it out there, spanner in the works, you both know anyway, I'm going to say, but I support George Galloway. It's my friend. I love him. I
like him too, but having been a diplomat for so long, I've seen politicians of all colours, and they're good and they're bad across the whole spectrum in my experience. But I've got nothing against
He's
George
agreed
Galloway.
to come on, so we'll try and make him. Yeah, we'll
that's
get
a
him on
result.
soon.
He's a great orator. Orator.
I support looking at everything through the lens of British national interest. And Ian and I met up today and had this. And I was talking about George Kennan, who has a wonderful phrase where he looks at American national foreign policy and said there are two issues. And Ian actually added a third. I'll let Ian do it. First was the sovereign integrity of America, and the second was making sure that Americans abroad were protected as much as possible. And you had a third in, and I thought those three together are not a bad place to start. And I'd be looking at this and thinking to myself, okay, what's in Britain's national interest here? And that's for one side. Let's say it's not being a friend of America. We might want to be a critical friend, but what from very fundamental principles is in British national interest? I can't remember what the third one was in.
Prosperity.
Yeah.
Territorial integrity, keeping your people safe, and helping everybody to live a kind of prosperous life. Kind of prosperity. I mean, it's kind of common sense stuff, right? But it's amazing how quickly kind of politicians forget about it as they get tied up in all sorts of normative issues around our values and promoting our values and that kind of thing. You got to stick to the basics. And as you say, Steve, if you're going to do that, if you start to look at your foreign policy through the lens of your core strategic interests, the requirements for the territorial integrity of your state, the requirements to keep your people safe, and the requirements for building prosperity for all members of your society, now that has to be a good launch pad. And if you look at any of the big decisions that have happened on Ukraine, whenever Ukraine hasn't got what it's wanted, it has always been because individual states have put their domestic interests first. That's why the Germans haven't given Taurus missiles, for example. So foreign policy always starts and finishes with domestic policy, as far as I'm concerned.
And on this particular one, I wrote about 2 years ago. I wrote an article for the Naval Review. It wasn't a published article, but I said actually that I felt that actually Ukraine was less important to us than things in the Gulf. And it's just about oil, because actually if the price of oil goes to $200 or $300 a barrel, that's by no means impossible, then it'll crash this economy. It'll crash the world economy as well. But imagine if we're sitting here and trying to fill up our petrol tanks or whatever, the chances of us actually getting out of anything but getting away with a shallow recession will be low, and it could well pitch us into a depression. That's what happened when the first and the second oil shocks happened, and there's a chance here that this could be the third oil shock that would be devastating, for which you need stability in the Gulf. So stability in the Gulf is what I'd be arguing for, I think.
Yeah, we've got no core strategic interests in Ukraine, particularly since we've left the European Union. Our prosperity doesn't depend on it because we do very little trade and investment with Ukraine. It doesn't have any direct impact on our territorial integrity because Russia is not going to invade the UK, despite what the Daily Mail and other people may say. And actually, if anything, the war in Ukraine is making our people less safe, and that's why we should get out of it. It's making us poorer, and it's making our people less safe. And there's this kind of theoretical risk of territorial integrity. I mean, these are a bit, but as you say, with the Gulf, we have some massive, historical, economic, sort of political interests there, which have a very direct and meaningful bearing on our economic well-being in the UK. None of which applies, for Ukraine.
As Tony Benn famously said, there's always money for war. 450 billion for Ukraine. They wouldn't spend that on the British public. It's laughable.
And actually, the point is as well.
All of them, by the way, all of them, not just talking about the Labour, all of them.
If they'd spent this money on the Ukrainian economy, just imagine what an amazing place Ukraine would be today if the money they'd spent on war they spent on economic reconstruction of Ukraine from an already kind of middling-ish, stumbling along position that it found itself in 2014. Had they put all that money into that, that Ukraine would be a much different place today.
Brilliant. Okay, chaps, we'll try it, and so it's Monday. We'll try and get another short video. This was going to be a short video, 15 minutes, just over half an hour. We'll try and do a short one towards the end of the week for maybe 15 minutes as an introduction as to who Ian is and who Steve is, and how we all came to meet, and who I am even. How he came to me and why we're doing this and why we are the rebel realists. What's that all about? Exactly. We'll do that in the next video.
Good plan.
Happy days.
I'm lucky. I'm in good company. I'm very lucky.
Great. Have a great time.
One final thing, if I may say, any final predictions? We can have a sportsman's bet on it. What that means to any of our overseas viewers is it means nothing, but someone will end up having to buy somebody else a beer. On the Iran situation, will it escalate or will it start to fade because of some kind of diplomacy and back channels?
Do you want to go first,
Stay bubbling for a bit and start to fade as the Gulf states start to realise that there's going to be a massive economic price for them to keep having their airspace shut off and the whole, Straits of Hormuz closed off and so on. I think that would put the Americans, under pressure from the Gulf Arabs and Saudi Arabia.
Interesting. The GCC states, there's no love lost between them and the Iranians, but I think you're right, Ian. And I think that, hopefully, I'm going to say this, hopefully sensible heads will prevail in the Trump administration to say, we don't want to treble the oil price, because that would be catastrophic. So that's
so good for Russia.
Yeah,
it'd be very good for Russia. It'd definitely be
good for Russia. Good for Iran. They've already got about 40 to 80 billion barrels of oil off the coast of China, apparently, or already exported it. So
you might see the arbitrage that's going on that right now, Steve.
Yeah.
I think it will escalate, but let's hope I'm wrong.
I'm worried you might be right, but let's see.
Let's see.
Okay, chaps, we will we'll open the next discussion on how this ended. Thank you very much indeed.
See who's buying the beers.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Cheerio. Good night.
Cheers, mate.